When looking at pop art imagery, one thing that you might notice is something called a halftone, which are these dots that are kind of showing up like this comic book style. The halftone simulates a gradient of shades within a limited number of tones. Traditionally, it was black and white. And although it was created as a result of the limitations of print media, so this would happen a lot of times when things were printed, like comic books or comics in the newspaper, a halftone pattern effect can also be used on purpose to make an image look more interesting. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking an image and we are going to be doing some halftone pattern work to it to make it look more visually interesting in the style of pop art. So first we need to start with a photo that you took. It can either be of an object. Remember, pop art used things in popular culture, or it can be a person. A lot of times there were celebrities used. It could even be an animal. So I'm going to start with an image of a camera that I took. So when you open up your image, the first thing that you want to do is go up to Adjustments and click Auto Black and White. Then after you have changed it into black and white, you're going to go back up to Adjustments and we're going to go down to Levels. And I want you to play around with the levels and I want you to make sure that you have some really bright whites and some really dark darks. We don't see a lot of detail here. You can play around with your levels either way. You can move them together, you can move them independently until you get to a spot that you are happy with. So I think I like the way this looks. So after you have done your black and white and played around with your levels, you are going to make a copy of that layer. I'm going to go ahead and unlock that first layer. Layer, duplicate layer. And now I'm going to go up and I am going to add a halftone pattern. So if I click filter, I can go all the way down to halftone and I can play around with the frequency. I would encourage you to really think about how it either makes your detail disappear or stand out while still giving it a halftone effect. I kind of like the way that that looks. After you have done the halftone pattern, you're going to go back up to filter. You're going to hover over details and click sharpen. And you can decide how sharp you want your halftone pattern to be. And then we are going to go over to our layer menu and blend mode. And this time we are going to click on multiply. You can play around with your opacity a little bit, but you really want to be able to see that halftone pattern. So now that we have our halftone pattern, we need to go back and play around with colors. When we looked at pop art, when we looked at things that Andy Warhol had done, you really saw bright, bold color that contrasted with each other. So for example, this halftone pattern here, real bright red in the foreground, and then you have that blue showing through. The images of Marilyn Monroe, you had colors that stood out from the background. So that's what we're going to be doing here. So for each color that you do, you need a new layer. So I'm going to go ahead and do my new layer, and I want that layer to go in between my background copy and my background. And first I'm just going to do my background. So I'm going to click over here and choose a color, maybe a bold purple for my background. Grab my fill, my paint bucket, click to fill it. Now, I think I want to make my opacity a little bit lighter because if my opacity is all the way up, I feel like I lose some of the detail of my camera. Okay, so again, second color now. This is the color that I'm going to add to the camera, and I want it to be opposite of the purple. So new color, new layer, and I'm going to go ahead and pick a color that is maybe opposite. So maybe I'm going to go down and pick a green color, kind of like the way that those two look together. I'm on my new layer, so I've got my paint bucket filled. And I can go ahead and cover that. Again, play around with the opacity if you're losing out on some of your detail. So now that we are on that green layer, I can use the tools that I know how to use with the cutout and the mask, choosing my draw mask. I can play around with my opacity and my brush size like I have before. And I am going to be creating a mask over top of the camera so that it shows through the purple underneath. So again, think about zooming in and think about using a smaller brush size when you get to some of your smaller areas. So I'm going to go ahead and pause and do that. You want to make sure that you have at least 2 colors for this assignment, and then your final color, whether you do 2, 3, or 4, should be white. So I'm going to go ahead and add my final layer. I'm going to go in and choose a white. Again, this time I'm not going to fill the background. This time I'm going to go ahead and use my brush. I can play around with the opacity still. I can play around with my brush size still, but this time I'm just adding some highlights of white. So for example, if I wanted to add some whites, maybe right in the middle, I can. I did the opacity here. So this is just going to give us some highlights to make our object or person look a little bit more three-dimensional. Okay. When you are all done, you're going to click File and Save. I recommend bumping your quality up and saving it as a JPEG. If you did this with a person, again, you can do more than 2 colors. Just really pay attention to making your object look like it is inspired from pop art.